We're beginning a new series titled The Seven Great Spiritual Wonders of the World. It was Philo, the Greek philosopher in 225 BC, who decided to compile a list of the seven great wonders and achievements of the ancient world. Listen to this list that he composed. The lighthouse of Alexandria to guide ships into the harbor in 270 BC. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus, a white marble tomb in Turkey in 350 BC. The Colossus of Rhodes, the tallest statue in the world at that time, in 400 BC. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the Greek goddess, in 500 BC. The statues of Zeus at Olympias, Zeus being the king or the greatest of all of the Greek gods, in 600 BC. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar in Iraq, modern-day Iraq, in 600 BC, and the Great Pyramids of Giza, 2 million stones beginning in 2700 BC. And each of these seven mind-boggling marvels of the ancient world changed human perception. When people would see them or they would hear about them or get reports about them, they would be stunned and filled with awe and wonder. Be simply astonished at what humankind could do. Now, the question that I've been asking myself this week is, what if God had seven wonders of the spiritual world? Seven life-changing marvels for you and for me. What if God wanted to overwhelm us and fill us with spiritual wonder and astonishment? Now, before we go any further, I want a little exercise I want to ask of you. I'd like to ask you to close your eyes for just a moment and visualize your favorite ice cream. Favorite ice cream. See it, taste it, hold it in your mouth. Pretty good, isn't it? Now, tell someone what you imagined. The power of imagination is an amazing thing. Close your eyes again. Let me ask you this question. What image comes to your mind when I say the word God? What are you seeing this very moment? An old man with gray hair? A bright light? A scary image? Okay, you can open your eyes. The point here is that when we think about God, all of our ideas are what we call anthropomorphic ideas, coming from the Greek anthropos, human, and morphos, form or shape. By way of analogy, we think of God in human forms, in human terms, in human shapes. Ideas of complicated concepts are communicated to us in ways that we can understand in our humanness. Now, because we are anthropoi, that is, human beings, we tend to imagine or think of or describe or visualize God by way of anthropomorphic or human terms and images. So over the next 7 weeks, I want you to know who God is. Each week, we're going to take a little piece of the total picture and isolate it so that when we're done, we can fit all of the pieces together into one great mosaic of God's nature and character. I'd like us to develop a true picture of the nature and the character of God. And my prayer is that in doing that, you will not only know about God, but you will know God, and you will know the wonders of God in your life. And so the first great wonder of the spiritual world is that our God is an all-knowing, omniscient God. Omni, all, scient, knowledge, all-knowing God. This is the first great wonder of the spiritual world. We're not saying that God is just smart or a genius or scored 1,600 on his SAT scores. We're saying that there is not one piece of information floating around in this whole universe that God doesn't know about. He has complete knowledge about everything. The writer of Hebrews wrote these words in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 13. This is the New International Version of Hebrews 4:13. Now listen to this. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Listen to this. The earth is 25,000 miles in circumference. That is, if you drove around the equator. That's about the same distance that you mothers drive, dropping your children off to school and picking them up afterwards, and then running errands and going to sporting events and all kinds of activities in the school. 25,000 miles, and you would drive around the world. The earth weighs 6 septillion tons. It spins 1,000 miles an hour, revolving in an orbit of 580 miles around the sun. And yet it hangs in empty space, and no one knows how it happens. Perfect clockwork. But God does. He knows how it's done. He knows everything in the universe. The universe is a very broad, big place. If I had a penny in my hand this morning, I was holding it here, the closest star, by comparisons of human understanding or analogy, the closest star would be 530 miles away. The ends of our Milky Way would be 7,500 miles from this penny. The universe is a very, very, very big place, and our Milky Way is just one of millions of Milky Ways contained in the universe. And our God knows everything about all of that, all of creation. The writer of Hebrews said, all of creation. But not only does he know a lot about very big things, he knows a lot about very small things. He created them, he made them. There are 10 million species of insects running around our planet. 2,500 different kinds of ants alone, most of which probably visited your last barbecue in the summer. The Earth's a very big place, the universe is a very big place, and they're very small things. There are DNA particles. God knows everything. Everything is uncovered before him. He is omniscient. Not only knows about the universe, very big and very small, but what I love about the concept of the omniscience, of the all-knowing God, is a great wonder of the universe, is that he also knows everything about you and about me. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him. And so this leads in the 7 wonders of the spiritual world, this wonder of God's knowledge of everything. It leads to certain personal things that he knows about you and me. If he knows everything, then he knows me. And the first thing that he knows about me is he knows my fears and my frustrations. We find in the New Living Bible in Psalm 56, verse 8, you keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one of them in your book. I love that. You keep track of my tears, my sorrows, in your bottle. You hold them in your hand. The longer I'm in ministry, the more I realize that people, as I have met them over the decades, oftentimes are wounded people. We have broken hearts and broken lives. Many times we've been bruised and shattered by the past in our lives. I've had people say to me, if you knew what went on or what happened to me in my business or in my relationships, or if you knew what happened at home, or if you knew what happened in my marriage or with my kids, you'd be shocked. I heard the analogy of a tire, that our lives are like a tire rolling down the road. But most of us have flat sides to those tires. If it's a little one, it goes thump, 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 thump. Bigger ones, bigger flat sides to those tires, and it goes thud, 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 thud. If the wounds of the past are so big and our hurts are so large that the tires cut in half, it grinds to a stop. So I'm very well aware that life can get hard, and there's a lot to be afraid of. I heard of the story of a psychologist. I think somebody probably made this up, but I heard the story of a psychologist who had a man come to visit him, and the man said, I'm afraid to leave my house. I'm just terrified to step outside the door. I could get bitten by a bee, or there could be a snake in the grass, or I could get hit by a car. I just don't want to leave my house. What is wrong with me? And the psychologist said, really nothing. You just have an acute, clear picture of reality. All of those things could happen to you. But what you need to do is to learn the odds of that and to overcome that in your life. But that analogy has stuck with me, that oftentimes we begin to focus on all of the things that can harm us and all of the ways that we have been bruised or nicked or wounded in our lives. This great wonder says that there is no scar, there is no wound, there is no bruise that escapes the attention of God. No hurt goes unnoticed. It gets collected by God. We have never shed a tear that fell aimlessly to the ground, because our all-knowing God has taken note of that tear and caught it in his bottle. He is saying, when I catch that tear, I want you to know you will never cry alone. Nothing can cut a person more than the power of a broken love. Conversely, nothing can put back our lives together like the power of a loving God who knows me and loves me and reminds me over and over and over and over and over again, you can get through this. You are not alone. I am with you. I understand you. I know your fears. I'm the all-knowing God. I understand you. I catch your tears in my hand. And so the first great wonder of God's omniscience is that he knows our fears. Let me share with you what I consider to be the second great wonder of the omniscience and all-knowingness of God. So the first great wonder of the spiritual world, our God is an all-knowing God. Not only does he know my fears and my frustrations, but he also knows my failures as well. Now, this is good news and this is bad news. Let's start with the bad news. I don't have any secrets before God. None. I used to eat Oreos before I went to bed at night. I wasn't really proud of that because I'd have this big snack. I used to get a cup of milk and dip the Oreo in it, split the Oreo in two, lick the icing off. I started with 3 or 4 Oreos, but over time I would eat a full sleeve of Oreos. I was highly embarrassed about that and didn't want anybody to know about that, but I was eating the whole sleeve of Oreos. But God knew. He knew in those little tiny things. It's kind of a scary thought to be known by God, that God knows everything about us, that we cannot hide from him. Do you recall after the fall that Adam went hiding and God came and said, Adam, where art thou? as if God didn't know. God knew where Adam was. He simply wanted to point out that I'm aware that you are hiding from me. The problem is, where can you hide from an all-knowing God? Where can you hide? You can't. When I was about 10 or 12 years old, we lived in a rural area of Pittsburgh, right next to a dairy farm, and it was my job to go into the fields and collect the cows at the end of the evening. There was a bell cow, and I would collect them together and drive them up into the barn so that they could be milked by the Michael brothers, a group of 5 brothers that took care of this farm. And when I was with them, I noticed that all the time they were spitting. And I thought that was a pretty cool thing, you know, to just spit on the ground. Until the afternoon that I was raking leaves in our backyard with my mother, and I just went, spit. And she said, Stuart, Paul, what are you doing? I said, I'm spitting like the Michael brothers. She said, you can't spit. God does not like spitting. He sees it every time you spit. She's putting this giant guilt trip on me. Like God watching over me all the time. Now, some say that's exactly what they don't like about God. That he's sort of this big brother looking over my shoulder, ready to catch me as soon as I mess up. But that is not the spirit of the omniscience of God, of the all-knowingness of God. God does not exist to point out every wrongdoing and every failure in my life. The good news is, not only does God know my failures and see them, but he embraces them and forgives them. You'll recall the story of David after he had been with Bathsheba and they had a young child. David thought he got away with his relationship with Bathsheba and killing her husband Uriah. It was a whole year gone by. Then the prophet Nathan came knocking at his door. And he said, David, I need to tell you a story of 2 men. There was a rich man who had many sheep and a very poor man who had one tiny little ewe lamb that he would hold in his arms every night before it was time to go to bed. David, one day, the rich man had a visitor, and he wanted to prepare a meal for him. But to prepare that meal, he sent his servants to the house of the poor man to take his little lamb, the family pet. The children in the morning said, Daddy, where's our lamb? And he said, well, the rich man took it, and he prepared a meal with it. When David heard those words, his sense of justice was on fire. He said, go find that man and bring him here to me. I will punish him fourfold. And you know what Nathan said, David, you are the man. You are the man. That's when David wrote the 51st Psalm. Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy steadfast love. According to thy abundant mercies, blot out my transgressions and cleanse me from my sin. David was brought to his knees by God's forgiveness for him. Notice he starts out with the mercy part. Have mercy on me according to thy steadfast love. Then let's get to the forgiveness. Then blot out my transgressions. I'm willing to open that up to you because I know that you love me abundantly. You have abundant, steadfast love for me, so I can reveal myself to me. Here's what David realized. David realized that God was not pursuing him to catch him or to destroy him. God was pursuing him through the prophet Nathan to redeem him and draw him close to God and get his heart cleansed and clean. In the middle of all of my mess, God is saying, you do not have to hide from me or flee from me. You can be fully free in me. What I want you to know is that you can be found in me and know me intimately. The wonder of this great spiritual wonder is that God loves us intimately. He wants to lead us to him. He wants to love us totally in all of our parts, fully, so that we can find our greatest security when we failed him most, that we can find ourselves in his arms, that we can be open to him. I can be secure in him, that he not only knows me, not only knows my fears and my failures, but he embraces them, forgives them, and cleanses me from them. That's the second thing about God's great omniscience and knowledge of us. So we've been saying that the first great wonder of the spiritual world is that God is omniscient. He is an all-knowing God. He knows my fears. He knows my failures. There's one other spectacular thing about this great wonder that God knows. He knows my future. Because God knows everything, past, present, and future, he knows what's going to happen next. He knows the future. Everybody wants to know what the future is going to be like with this COVID virus. When are we going to find a vaccine? When can we all get tested? When is the market going to open up, the stores, the restaurants? When can we stop home shelter? When can we gather together again in football stadiums? Everybody wants to know the future, but nobody knows the future because God has put a veil between us, infinite, finite human beings, and him. He and he alone maintains the prerogative to know the future. Wall Street would love to know what's going to happen in the market the next day. They spend enormous amounts of money trying to predict the trends, but nobody knows. God has drawn a veil between us and the future. Our knowledge is severely limited, and it's severely limited because we lack one quality: omniscience, all-knowingness. God has this eternal, intrinsic, absolute knowledge from a infinite vantage point. Do you realize that? Eternal, intrinsic, absolute knowledge from an infinite vantage point. I don't know what the future holds, but I know the one who knows the future because he's omniscient. You know, the Hebrews had a concept of what we call wisdom. Wisdom is different from knowledge. There are a lot of highly educated people walking around with lots of knowledge, and that's good. That's very good. But there's one more step. It's called biblical wisdom. Wisdom is taking knowledge and putting a biblical perspective to it. Wisdom is taking knowledge and then understanding all of life from God's perspective. It's wisdom. It is applying knowledge in a godly way. We gathered this past Sunday on Easter Sunday morning here in the church parking lots, not for a service, but for the passing of the peace. God made us for relationship. At the very essence and core of the Trinity is intimate relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then he created us, and the primary reason he created us is so that we might know him and enjoy him forever. He loves relationship. And as Susan and I were there in our car and people were driving by and our windows were down and we were smiling and laughing and shouting hello and honking horns, everybody had such a big grin on their faces. It was astonishing to me how much we missed each other, how distant we have been from each other. This is clearly not God's idea. Isolation is not God's plan. So why does he allow these plagues, this pestilence, to come into our lives? In Latin, it's called venom. It's toxic. Why does he allow this distancing to happen? We're created for relationship. It's to get our attention. I said last week that God allows plagues to come into our lives and into our world to draw us to him, to get our attention, to let us know, hey, we're not in control here. You are. This is your world. You created it. You know everything about it. We don't. And from the 10 plagues of Egypt up to the plague of the Spanish flu, just a century ago, when our churches were once again closed and shut up. And in those days, there was so much more mystery about a plague than we have today. God is trying to say, I know the past, I know the present, I know the future. I'm all-knowing. My guess, having said that, is that in watching our news every evening, that it is not God before our people and our world who is winning the day. It seems to me that it's science and it's medicine and it's technology and it's government. But God is conspicuously absent from this current trial and plague. He is. What God would use to lead us and draw us to him so that we might worship him and love him and be in relationship with him is turning our country more and more to science and technology and government. That's the way to the future. Science, technology, government, they'll have the answers for the future. But we know they won't, because as great as that knowledge might be, it is infinite, it is finite from a limited perspective. It is not omniscient. Our knowledge is asking and trying to determine or trying to plot what will happen next. Only it can't know, and it doesn't know. This great wonder is that God gives us wisdom to understand the times, wisdom to understand this first great spiritual truth that only God is all-knowing. Wisdom is following his lead, his counsel, his advice, his direction, his promptings, his word. It's wisdom. That he is capable of leading us and guiding us and helping us to know how to live every aspect of our life. And so, isn't it amazing that this first great wonder of the spiritual world is that our God, unlike us, at our best science, at our best technology, at our best government, unlike us, our God is an all-knowing God who holds the future in his hands. He knows all about the universe. He knows all about the world we live in. He knows all about you and me. This great God, in his omniscient knowledge, knows my fears and understands them. He knows my failures and he forgives them. He knows my future and he directs me. Now what's amazing about that wonder, this is the wonder, the astonishment, the marvel, is that once I understand that and give my life to that and embrace it and receive it and cling to it and rely upon God's knowledge, then I can let go of my fears. I can let go of my failures. I can let go of my need to know the future and rest in him. And it is then, and only then, that I am fully and truly free as a person in my life. And I can trust in him. And if you don't know him, maybe this is the day that you could say, I don't know all about you, God, but I'm pretty convinced that you know everything. And I think I need that in my life. I'd like to ask you into my life today. Be my Lord, my Savior, my Redeemer. And overcome my fears and forgive my failures and Help me to trust in the future that you have for me. Now, here's what's going to be cool. We're going to, as I said, we're going to put these mosaics, these pieces together. We're saying the first great spiritual wonder is that he's omniscient, he's all-knowing. The second great spiritual wonder that follows with that is not only is he all-knowing, but he is ever present with me. And it's that wonder that we will look at next week. So closing a word of prayer with me. Father, thank you for this great wonder. I pray for my life this moment that you'll speak to me, for those that are listening. I pray that we can all rest and trust in the great wonder that you are all-knowing, that you love us, you forgive us, you provide a way for us. And if there's somebody, Lord, through this screen that wants to come to know you, may they just say, you know what, as best I can right now, I'm going to trust that. I'm going to start by trusting in a relationship with you, in a God who is all-knowing and who is all-present. Pray these things in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.